Okay, hello everyone. It is Kelly and Ned with the Relationship Loft, and we wanted to talk in this episode about childhood trauma. And this is a really touchy topic, but it's a topic that touches all of us. And we wanted to talk about it because it's really personal to us. It's really personal to me, and it affects people that we love. It affects our children. It affects our family. It affects all of our clients that come in to work with us, whose marriages are in crises.
Yeah,
And it affects most people in some way, shape, or form because most people are not on the healing path of doing their inner work.
yeah,
And when our trauma is not dealt with properly, it'll kinds it'll cause all kinds of mayhem in your life, in your marriage, in your relationships, in your body, in your health, mentally and physically. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it. And a lot of people don't really know that there are several different types of trauma, and we're going to be going over those today. I know for me personally, growing up, and babe, you can speak to this as well for your own life. For me personally, growing up, my childhood was really volatile. And it started when I was really young, around the age of 3 or 4, that I can remember back. And my parents were fighting quite frequently. And it lasted throughout my childhood. And it was nasty. And, they were going through their own stuff. And it happened all through their divorce proceedings and through their separation. And the impact was brutal. And I remember hating going to school. And I know a lot of you will be able to relate to this. I remember hated going to school because I was so sad about what was going on at home. And I couldn't focus at school because of what was going on at home. I was dissociating and I was zoning out and kind of going into my own la la land world. And because of that, I was labeled as ADD, ADHD, whatever you want to call it. And because of this, early on, I took on a lens and a self-identity of just not being understood at all by my parents. And so they were not emotionally available to me. And it was tough. And just the poison and the vitriol going back and forth between them was toxic. And it went on through their 30s and into their 40s. And it really had a devastating effect on myself, on my psyche, on my motivation, on my self-concept, on my self-esteem. And it really led me straight down the path of seeking love and identity outside of the home.
yeah,
And that led me to, become a teenage mom. I got into a really toxic, abusive marriage with a narcissist who was physically abusive and really abusive in every sense. And I've spent the last 11 years, healing myself. And it's taken a long time, and also taken me meeting my husband, you, babe, who really restored my faith in men. And he helped me really take all the pieces of myself and put myself back together. And everyone needs an angel like that in their lives. And we're fortunate to do this work with people to help them move through their childhood traumas and get on the healing path so that they can have, amazing lives and amazing love that they really deserve. And so that's just a little bit about my childhood and how that's affected me in my life. What about you, babe?
I mean, mine was not quite as volatile as yours, but again, I'm the product of a divorce, and um, at an early age, I think 12 or 13 years of age, maybe a little younger. I can't even remember quite, but pretty much the same thing. It affected my morale. I remember really being a joyous and a really happy child prior to all of that, and I just remember the wind really coming out of my cells afterwards. Um, you know, and during the divorce, and moving from one home to another, changing schools
Yeah.
where I was really comfortable and really doing well, things began to change for me. Because my self-esteem, I began to lose it. And again, like I said, my morale and my just my outlook about myself changed. So um, it just became a challenge. These weren't things I wasn't going to see someone and talking about what was going on. Your parents do the best job they can to try
Yeah.
to explain things in the best way that they can. But when they're in their dysfunction, it's hard to convey exactly clearly to a child what's really going on and why. And even if they did at that age try to explain to me some of the things that were going on, um, they were mature things, so I wouldn't be able to really grasp them anyway. And I wouldn't. So it would be probably more confusing for me than anything.
Yeah.
So needless to say, though, it would have helped to probably have talked to someone who could have given me some clarity for a length of time anyway, until um, you know when you're a certain age, you begin to make things, the problems that other people have around you, especially your parents, you begin to make them your own.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
and you carry the burden of those issues with you until, like you said, you start doing this work, and you begin to relieve yourself of some of that pain and the anguish of the trauma that has been caused by the unfortunate.
Yeah.
Um,
And you recreate, really, uh, if you're not aware or conscious, you recreate what happened in your childhood into your own adulthood. Um,
I mean, but, we're talking about the unhealed wounds, and seeking some way, and a lot of times we do this unknowingly, unconsciously, um, trying to seek ways to heal those wounds that we aren't really familiar with, but it's a default programming as a result of the trauma that we begin to seek the thing that we don't necessarily have in ourselves. We begin to look for that in others outside of ourselves. So
yeah.
that's one of the biggest issues is, like, when you are seeking people unknowingly to heal your trauma, that's not always a good thing. Because
Right.
you don't have someone, or you don't match up with someone who is able to actually provide that in a healthy way. Oftentimes what we do is trigger the other person, and we're dealing with their dysfunction as well as our own. So
Right. Yeah.
it makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Dysfunction, right? It puts you into your dysfunction. So
Oftentimes, yeah. When a person is triggered, it will usually trigger, if they're in dysfunction and they're triggering you, it will
and
usually trigger your dysfunction.
if you had, as a child, had parents who were operating in their own dysfunctions, you as a child are going to start displaying your own dysfunctional patterns in adolescence.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, we do it as children anyway.
Yeah.
But when you begin to see it in the so-called mature adult, yeah, oftentimes we begin to mimic and take on those patterns of behavior, and we carry them with us, unfortunately.
Yeah. And we're programmed with that dysfunctional behavior when we're children. We're programmed with it. It becomes our blueprint. And oftentimes, well, most often, all the time, if our parents were in dysfunction and they uh, were operating from that place, and that is what you were around, that was your environment, you're literally hardwired with that yourself.
Yeah.
And so it makes it very difficult to, number one, wake up to that, own that, but number two, completely reprogram yourself to where you are a version of you and not the dysfunctional versions of your parents, and the version of you that's dissociating and not wanting to look at your life or yourself because it's just too painful. It's really painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard work, especially in the beginning. So, so I'm going to refer to my notes here. Most people, when they think of trauma, right, babe, they think like punching and hitting and like starving your kid in the closet,
Abuse,
sexual abuse,
sexual abuse,
choking, horrible things.
Really violent things
yeah,
think about.
Violent things that are all terrible. But those are just like one form of childhood trauma. And there are actually 10 types. And we're going to go over with you today to educate you on the different types to help you to become self-aware. Because in doing this work with people, so often I'll hear from people who are like, yeah, my childhood was so great. It was so perfect. I had a great childhood. And that's really only because they don't understand what the different forms of trauma are. They think, oh, because I wasn't hit or, slapped around or bruised or, called horrible things,
right.
I had a beautiful childhood. And I think that that's a story that is just part of our culture that is unfortunate because most people don't have. No one has a perfect childhood. That's just a bunch of baloney.
Yeah.
And so trauma.
And I want to say also, and culturally, we put most of the emphasis on the more violent aspects of trauma than we do on, the types that we're actually going to talk about. This is why so many people are unfamiliar or unaware of any of these traumas specifically that pertain to them, in their situation or as children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really what causes all marital strife and interpersonal relationship strife is not understanding what's going on with you mentally, emotionally, and physically. And it all stems back to your trauma. So trauma, according to the somatic texts, is too much, too fast, too soon. And this is also inclusive of all forms of neglect as well. So neglect is also a form of trauma. It really has a negative impact that the neglect does on children in terms of their ability to learn how to emotionally connect with other people. And it's a big problem. It's a big problem that we see. And when trauma happens, fight or flight takes over. And this is kind of going to get a little nerdy, a little bit geeky. Some of you may have heard about some of this stuff, and maybe you haven't. But at least if you haven't, you can go do your own research and find out more about this stuff. But when trauma happens, fight or flight takes over, and the little organ in our brain called the hippocampus goes offline. And there many times is no memory of what happened, no distinct memory. You might have a little glimpse or whatever, but no distinct memory of what happened. But the trauma stays stuck in the body. There's no time stamp on the memory. But the trauma that stays stuck in the body and in the mind, depending on what kind of trauma it was, causes PTSD, causes personality dysfunctions and disorders, addiction, chronic relationship issues, physical pain. I can't tell you how many clients who come in to see us and they're in physical pain because Netta and I are also healers. We're both Reiki masters, and I've been a massage therapist and somatic body work for 20 years. And so people develop all kinds of unhealthy coping mechanisms from the fact that they're living in a perpetual state of fight or flight because they haven't gotten help and they haven't been on the healing path.
Yeah.
And even when you do get on the healing path, I'm telling you from experience, with me, myself being on my own journey, because I've experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of different forms of trauma in my lifetime. And so I'm still working through it all the time. It gets easier and easier. Uh, so anyway, I just
Yeah,
want
I mean, we all are, it's, and much of us will begin to understand this is a journey once you start, a never ending journey. It just gets better though
yeah,
once you start the journey of healing. The other thing I want to take note of is that, the spectrum of trauma, like you always say, there's a range. And the severity of that trauma is different for each individual. We are built differently, so we respond to things very differently also. So depending, you can have two people go through the same type of trauma and actually respond to it very differently. It can
right.
be a little bit more severe for one person as opposed to another person,
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
we want to make
totally.
sure that we're clear about that too, because I know a lot of people are saying, when we're talking about this and we're going to discuss these individual traumas and how they can affect a person, it's just important that people really understand that you may very well have gone through some of these things that we're talking about, and they may not have affected you in a way that you're either aware of, um, uh, into the capacity that they debilitate you in some way, okay, or keep you from doing something or make something in your life seem unachievable or very hard for you. For a lot of people, that is the case, and they're unaware of why that is the case, and that's why we're having this talk today. So I just want to make sure we were really clear on how this can affect you um, differently, as a person and individual, because we all are different.
And I will say that I attract and we attract a lot of empaths and a lot of healers into our tribe and as clients as well, because that's what we are. And so I will tell you that if you are what's known as a highly sensitive person or an empath or a healer, it's really likely that you may have experienced more trauma than the average person. The average person has experienced at least 3 of these traumas that we're going to go over today. And a highly sensitive person, basically an empath, is a person who just takes on the energy of everything and everyone around them. They take it on because we're healers. And if you don't know how to protect yourself from that and recover from that, it can become very exhausting and toxic at some point. But when you're younger and you're a child and you're an empath and a healer as a child, you're taking on all of the toxic energy around you from your parents, from people who raised you, the messages from the communities or the churches or where however you grew up. You are programmed with all of these messages and all of this energy.
Yeah.
And so the more sensitive you are, the more traumatic certain things can be. So we encourage you guys, and we're going to put up on the screen, or at least try to, the 10 different childhood traumas. And so we encourage you to grab a pen and paper. So as we go through this list, I want you to see which types of childhood trauma, if any, you've had to contend with in your life. Because this not only helps us to become more self-aware, which is everything. Self-awareness is everything. It allows you to get to the root of your beliefs and your stories and
Really
your
begin to explore,
concept.
yeah, really begin to be able to explore those things that are really, like I said earlier, holding us back and keeping us back from
Exactly.
reaching our full achievement.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
These are just divine breadcrumbs to your healing. That's what I say. So, all right, let me do this. I'm going to pull up the list. Actually, I'm going to put you back. There we go. And I'm going to pull up the first list. Can you see it? You can't see it, huh? I'm gonna take
Yeah, just take me out and you can.
actually, I'm going to take me out too because I'm seeing that. Okay. Well, I have notes that I can see better. So Hopefully you guys can see this, and it'll give you some time to um, write this stuff down. But the first form of childhood trauma is any addiction in the home. So this could be drugs, illegal drugs or legal drugs, because we all know some people who are totally strung out on all kinds of medication for depression and for pain and painkillers and Valium and all these kinds of things that just are terrible and keep people addicted. Um, Alcohol is a huge one. Uh, Sex addiction, porn addiction, gambling, parents who are addicted to work addicts that are never home. So those, and there are other forms of addiction, but those are the main ones that we see. The second one is verbal abuse. So, like mom and dad screaming at one another, verbal abuse towards you, or verbal praise towards you missing, which is the form of neglect, which again is going to really affect a child's ability to feel seen and understood and important in the world. And it's going to affect their ability to have relationships and to connect with other people. Number 3 is emotional abuse or neglect. So this could be shaming your child often, labeling them certain things, enmeshment, where you're involving your children in adult themed conversations and situations that they have no business being a part of. Neglect. So forms of neglect could be not being emotionally available to your kids, a lack of emotional connection and affection, hugging, kissing, loving, very often, telling your kids you love them very often.
We're taught to be hard. We're taught to be strong, not to cry, all these things. So oftentimes men mistakenly think that if they show, their son any type of affection in the way of showing love and care, and even, sometimes encouragement, if they
Yeah,
feel,
and that's
they
what I was
feel,
going to say too.
yeah,
The lack of verbal praise,
yeah,
telling your children what they're good at, telling them how great they are at the things that they're great at.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
so often, as parents, we tend to sometimes, when we're not paying attention and being conscious and aware, we're so busy in our own lives that we're not, that anytime we're sometimes interacting with our kids, it's about something or over something that they're doing wrong, or teachers or school or whatever.
Well, it's really easy to get into that habit. Like you said, when you're preoccupied with work and life, oftentimes by the time we get home to our children, we're usually tired and exhausted,
Yeah,
and you know we know that everything requires energy, especially when we're dealing with our children. And oftentimes, unfortunately, we have more energy for our work than we do our children. This is what leads us to um, oftentimes in a weary state. We look at the child in terms of, always from a disciplinary standpoint,
yeah,
and looking for the thing to correct them around, rather than, like you said, encouraging them and praising them for the things that they do really, really well. And even exploring, in some cases, we deal with people who have kids with ADD, ADHD, and that can be a huge challenge. And so you have to really become resourceful when you're working with these children in this capacity, because it can be taxing, energetically, mentally. So you have to find ways and become resourceful, to really explore what this child is truly interested in, that
Yeah.
can hold their attention. And oftentimes we don't have that energy to do that. Again, when you're dealing with a child in that capacity, it's very easy to get frustrated with working with them. Because they're very um, their attention span is very short usually, and they have a hard time just really focusing. And when you're talking about schoolwork, that can become an issue, and
Yeah.
it often does for a lot of children.
Especially when
Um,
it's schoolwork that's so boring. You know what I'm saying? I can.
Unfortunately, that is the case, and it
Okay.
has been.
So it's really our job as parents to foster in these kids and all of our kids, really let them explore what they're good at and encourage them in those ways, and not put the labels on them and put the pressure on them, uh, and truly praise them more than we're, getting pissed at them.
Yeah.
Another form of neglect, latchkey kids, parents who are never home. That's another form of neglect. Kids really do feel neglected. Okay. My own kids, I know I've always worked. I worked, since I was a teenage mom. And I've always pretty much worked for myself. I've been an entrepreneur. And there were years, especially with my older daughters who are now grown and out of the house, who, it was mom wasn't home sometimes until 6 or 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
And they felt neglected.
Yeah.
I know that I did when I was a kid. We were total latchkey kids.
Yeah.
So the next one is, and I'll take you out again so that possibly maybe that's a little better to see. Physical abuse is number 4. So things like beatings and hitting and choking and punching, sexual molestation, rape, which is so devastating and so common. I never realized how common sexual abuse is for girls and for boys, until I started doing this work years ago with women. I had no idea how common it was. Fortunately, I never had to deal with anything like that in my family growing up. I can't even imagine, but it's very common. And so, sexual molestation done to you or anyone in your home would fall under physical abuse. Number 5 is abandonment. So, like death or like off to war, which are obviously like that's like a no fault type of situation. Foster care, adoption, parent leaves the family home. Sometimes parents just up and leave and they're like, peace out. You know what I'm saying? I know that's affected some people in my family, and in yours as well. Um, and or I wrote this one down too. A parent is gone a lot, and not home. And maybe that's due to work reasons. Maybe that's due to the parent is irresponsible and immature and off doing their thing. So that's another form of abandonment right there. The next one is number 6, personal trauma. So these are examples of like if you were bullied in school or you were put down or you were labeled like ADHD and you didn't fit in. If you were the scapegoat child or like the black sheep in the family because you were a little different. Those are all labels and they're very traumatic for the people who experience them. Number 7, workaholism. If you have a parent or both parents that are workaholics and who work 24/7, that's traumatic on any child. Okay, so number 8, sibling trauma. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this. I know I can. If you had a sibling that bullied you or was abusive towards you in any way, um, if you perceived one of your siblings to be a golden child or the favorite, that's very traumatic for the person on the receiving end. And it causes lots of people lots of heartache that takes them years to overcome. Especially when that dynamic is still alive and well in your family of origin. Um, and number 9 is family trauma and community trauma. So they're similar. So, like, Mother Nature events is a form of this. Terrorizing events such as like 9/11, all the tornadoes and the hurricanes and like the natural disasters are so traumatizing for so many people. Um, Family trauma, so like lack or poverty mindset in the family, always seeking financial security, that's a really big one. Um, and Another form of family trauma is family secrets. Uh, that is something that I think our generation, babe, is really bringing to the forefront and going, here, this is what we know to be true. And there's no shame in telling your story and speaking your truth and living your truth. And, family secrets are very traumatic when you find certain things out and when you hear certain things and you were never told. It's very traumatic. Um, and it can really affect you in very negative ways and have negative impact. And I think that family secrets are so common, aren't they, babe?
That has really, there's really no other way to say it, but for the better part of the last century has been dominated by men. We know that the playing field has become more level. Women can demand much more of men now, especially in relationships. Because they can fend for themselves now. They can. It's not this thing where they have to latch on to a man just because of his status. A woman can create and do whatever she would like to do for herself now and make just as much money. Um, so things have changed in a lot of ways, but historically, because of that system, there were a lot of things that were done that were overlooked, unfortunately. That a lot of men would do. So it's unfortunate um, that these things sometimes come out later on,
Yeah.
and we don't even realize the impact that they've had on us
Yeah.
as adults
Yeah.
until they're discovered and
Later on in life.
yeah, oftentimes released. And I mean, and we're talking about there's so many different topics that you could cover
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
that specific issue. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing that we want to bring awareness around is that because of these so-called secrets, and we're talking about this so that we can bring awareness around it, is to help people begin to explore again some areas of their life where they have a challenge and begin to look back and see what's been going on or what has played out in your family dynamic that may be a clue or give you a clue to what the significance of that event that occurred may have had in terms of the impact that it had on you negatively.
Yeah.
So this is why we're bringing it up because it is so. It's one of those things that a lot of people don't really discover until late in life, unfortunately. And oftentimes, the damage is so deep. Even when you find out, it's hard to begin the process. First you have to process it,
Right.
And then you have to begin the work of reprocessing, altogether.
And reprogramming.
Yeah, and reprogramming, trying to get on the other side of
Yeah.
some of this stuff. So yeah, it's a very it has a huge impact negatively on a lot of people,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah.
And I brought up family secrets because, look, you have to start living your truth and speaking up and just and keeping it real and with yourself and with your own family and with your own kids. Even if your parents didn't have the guts to do that with you, and be really honest and truthful with you about their childhood and their past and their lives. And because they don't realize the negative impact that that has on you, you can change that dynamic, and you can be the healer in your family who comes forth and says, okay, this is who I am, this is my truth, let's heal and let's heal together. Because once you begin to heal, your children will begin to heal as well. That's how this works.
Yeah. And then, like you said, it begins to pave the way for generations of healing from historical trauma that has been placed on us.
Yeah. So number 10 is mental illness in your family. So just a few examples: borderline personality disorder, bipolar personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder is one of them, schizophrenia is one, and there are others. There are other disorders, but if you had any of this kind of stuff and like severe depression in your family growing up, that is another form of trauma that affected you mentally and physically on the energetic level. And that's the level where you must begin to heal, is the energetic level. So that's the 10 forms of the 10 types of childhood trauma. That's the childhood trauma checklist. And we'll put those back down. And so, yeah, how does this show up, babe? How does this show up? And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the 3 most frequent ways this shows up in the people that we work with.
Well, one of the biggest ways is that we see most of our clients, especially, like you said, we're both healers, and it's part of our business to help people heal in this way, energetically and through somatic touch or massage. With most people we see have a lot of physical pain due to a great deal of stress and anxiety. And oftentimes this stress can lead to a lot of fighting in your relationship, especially. And oftentimes we don't really understand what it is, why we have such a hard time identifying and hearing our partners in ways sometimes. But it's honestly because we're talking about the depth of pain at the energetic level, and we're talking about how this begins to affect your psyche emotionally. These are things that need to be addressed, but oftentimes we're more focused on the physical aspects of the pain and healing that part of the trauma or the pain, rather than actually addressing the core issue,
right?
Where it actually starts, where it comes from, and why it begins to identify itself in the ways that we begin to feel physically in our bodies.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the ways.
Yeah, people come in all the time hurting, with physical pain, and a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, going through a lot of stuff. And it's because of the body being in a perpetual state of fight or flight. And it's because it's due to the trauma being stuck in the body. It's stuck there. The body has a memory.
Yeah.
And so most people are not talking about what's happened to them. They're not understanding or owning the severity of their trauma, and they're pushing it down. They're pushing it down. They're pushing it down. I know for me, that was true for many, many years. It's not that I didn't want to own it or see it. It's that I couldn't. I couldn't. And then I wanted to, and then it's like, wow, this is a lot of shit. So there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of guilt around owning all of it, because what happened to you is not your fault. But when you're a grown person, when you're an adult, it is your responsibility to heal yourself, period. Yeah. And there are no excuses at that point. 100% responsibility and ownership, no matter what. Because you're the only one ultimately who can change your life and make it what you want it to be. No one else can do this work for you.
No.
So that's the number one way, is the physical pain due to the stress, the anxiety from the trauma trapped in the body. The number two way we see it show up is with addiction, alcohol, drugs, porn, and sex addiction. That is so common today. Gambling, addiction to unhealthy and toxic relationships, people getting in toxic relationships, and that becoming an addiction.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're used to from childhood trauma. We've had clients walk in our door literally with a drink in hand saying, help me, please. I can't stop drinking in the middle of the day. And this has happened so many times. I can't even tell you. So yeah, addiction is a big one. And I know for myself, included, there have been times and periods of my life where I'm like, wine, I'm a mom, I need more wine. I mean, I have woken up to, sending wine texts to people, the next morning going, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And so I have to really keep a check on myself. You know what I mean? I have to keep a check on myself, because if you don't keep a check on yourself and you're not conscious, you can find yourself in addiction and it taking over your life.
Yeah.
So,
there are a lot, and it's one of those, unfortunately, it's some of these things that we become addicted to are very easy to do. Like you said, with the stress of the day and coming home and just thinking, oh, I deserve a glass of wine or two. Two turns to four.
Yeah.
Two turns to four turns to eight, 8 turns to 12, in a night.
All that. Huh? I don't know about all that.
Well, I'm just saying for different people, it's very easy to happen because it's a legal substance, first of all. It's not like you have to go out and try to find someone who can sell it to you. It's just we use it to oftentimes wind down, and it's very easy to for this to become a pattern of behavior and a habit for you. That next thing you know, you're looking at an entire bottle of wine down or a 6-pack of beer, and for everyone, it's very different what that looks like and how it plays out in their life. We're speaking from a place of dysfunction, where it actually begins to hinder, your progress in a negative fashion. So that's more or less what we're speaking to around.
Really, what you have to look at is, how is this addiction? And I want to tell you guys this. Everyone has addiction. Everyone has addiction to something. Addiction is on a scale, okay? It's on a spectrum, and everyone's addicted to something. I don't care who you are. So there's no shame in this. But what I wanted to say and point out that's so important to look at is, whatever your, vice of choice is, how is it negatively impacting your life? How badly is it impacting your relationships? How badly is it impacting you at work and to do your job? How bad is it having a negative effect on you being a parent? So those are really the questions to ask yourself. How is this affecting me in the other areas of my life? Is this just something I enjoy, in moderation, or is this like taking over my life and really affecting my life in negative ways? Yeah. So that's really the question to ask yourself there. Is it unhealthy? So the number 3 way we see this show up, the childhood trauma show up for people, is the marriage breakdown, the relationship issues due
Oh
to
yeah.
trauma and never having gotten the healing and or the skill set required to have a healthy and happy marriage. You know, most people definitely don't have the skill set because the skill set is a new skill set. This is a new skill set. This is a totally new relationship model that we have today than the relationship model of our parents and our grandparents.
Yeah.
So it requires a very sophisticated, high level set of skills. So most people don't know those. And then on top of that, you can have a skill set all day long, but if you have trauma and you've not begun your own inner healing work, you're never going to have the relationship and the love that you really deserve.
No, no. The trauma really, what we see is it creates many barriers in different aspects of a person's relationship, whether it be communication, it can be sex, it can be your relationship with your children. Um, and if these things aren't addressed, oftentimes we don't see them early on. You know, the butterflies are there when we meet our partner and our spouses, and we're putting on the act. But we very well know um, marriage really begins when the problems do. And oftentimes if we are working from a place of dysfunction, we begin this process of finger pointing.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier to blame someone else for our shortcomings, um,
Mm-hmm.
our unhappiness. Because as children, we're often made to think that it's the case that if you're dealing with an issue, a lot of times if it's not adjusted within a child's upbringing, a lot of times we automatically do it as children. We blame others. And it's a natural part of being a child. It's just what we do as children. And if it's never addressed, that can become the habit for us, in addition to the impact of anything that we learn from our parents negatively, or our current surroundings at that point.
Yeah.
And these become the lenses through which we look at everything around us, especially when we're dealing with issues and problems. So
Yeah.
it becomes a very default mode to begin to point the finger by addressing our partners around the issues that we're having, either with ourselves or within a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I love when you say that. Marriage truly begins when the problems begin. That's when marriage begins. And then how are you going to navigate that? How are you going to work through that together?
Yeah.
A wedding does not make a marriage.
No.
It's cute, and the honeymoon's cute, but the marriage does not begin until the problems begin, truly. And yeah, and what happens is, the honeymoon phase, comes to a screeching halt, and the problems begin, and the dysfunctions begin to rear their ugly heads. And
Now it's time to do the work.
yeah, now it's time to do the work. And when your partner goes into default mode, it's going to throw you into your default mode. It's going to throw you into what we call your losing strategies pattern.
Yeah.
And we all have a losing strategy pattern. We work with people around their patterns every day. And yeah, it all goes back to the childhood trauma. So these are the three ways that we see trauma show up. These are the main three ways that trauma has shown up in our own lives, in our families' lives, and clients' lives. And so what to do about it? What to do about it? It's been a journey for us, hasn't it, babe? I mean, if you've never heard our story before, Ned had been on his own healing journey for like 15 years before we met. And I had been on mine for like a year before we met. And healing is so important. It's so important. Um,
It really allows for a depth of understanding when you're dealing with an individual that you otherwise wouldn't have the type of empathy and compassion and sympathy a lot of times for a person. You wouldn't even be able to feel those things
right,
when and it's because you know, oftentimes when we're dealing with undealt trauma, um, we're usually a shell of our true selves.
right.
And what that means is there's an emptiness within us that we just don't know how to feel properly. We don't know how to um, replace that emptiness in a healthy fashion or in a healthy way, because oftentimes we're not looking at ourselves in that capacity. We're not trying to figure out what's going on deeply inside of myself. Why do I really feel this way? You know, why am I really unhappy? You know,
Yeah.
because if you're by yourself a lot of times, and you know some of our clients are by themselves, you can't really blame people for your unhappiness, right?
Well, you can. You can
Well,
blame
I
mom.
mean, most people, a lot of people do, but I'm saying, truthfully, if you want to get on the road to healing and you want to start feeling better about yourself, that's an inward journey,
Totally.
you
Yeah.
know. And so it's just unfortunate that most people are unaware that that's where the true journey begins. And like you said, with both of us having me being on my own and you on your own, and then us coming together, that proved to be one of the best things for the both of us because we were able to hear each other in a way that a lot of people in those same situations will
Yeah.
have a really hard time identifying with and cluing into and being able to hear and listen and show up in ways for each other that we often do day in and day out. So,
Yeah. Which is what got us into this work, right? Because we've
exactly.
been doing the work on ourselves and with one another for so long. And we have so much compassion and empathy for people who are in suffering because it's needless suffering and it doesn't have to be this way. So the solution really is your inner healing. And so the first action step that we would tell you to do is sit down and like have a come to Jesus with yourself and ask yourself, like, honestly, what have I endured? Go through that childhood trauma checklist that we shared with you today in the episode and ask yourself, you know, have I even begun my inner healing journey yet? You
Right.
know, because for years I looked for therapist after therapist, someone who could help me. And what's unfortunate is most therapy and marriage counseling and things like that, they don't work because it's talk therapy, and it's left brained and it's cognitive thinking brain just talking to someone, and that's not the part of the brain or the body that should be addressed to heal your trauma or reprogram your subconscious mind, which is where all of the problems exist.
Mm.
And so you're not going to find that kind of healing work, unfortunately, at the marriage counseling office or at the therapist office.
Yeah.
I know because I went for years and couldn't find anyone until 11 years ago. I found a therapist who is also a coach and a somatic healer and very gifted and very talented. And so she was my first teacher. And so and then ask yourself, how much longer do I want to stay in this place of pain and suffering? Right? Like, how much longer do you want to stay inside of yourself feeling completely inadequate and in pain? You
Yeah.
know, I was there for many years and it really was a shitty place to live, a shitty way to live inside of yourself, because you will continue on the same path until you decide to do something very different, radically different than what you've tried before. I know because That's what I've had to do. And if I had to do it that way, you have to do it that way. Ned had to do it that way. So do you.
Mm-hmm.
My story is your story. It's everyone's story.
Yeah.
So number two thing to take action on, get some energy work, get some healing work. Reiki is an amazing modality. There are other modalities of energy work, somatic body work. Both of these help the body heal and come into homeostasis. And so if you're local to us, definitely call, book an appointment. If you're not local to us, get referrals and find great healers in your area and go get healing work done. Find a coach, find a teacher who can help you.
Right.
Because everybody needs that person or those people to help you onto the healing path and who will hold your hand and help you put the pieces of yourself and your life back together.
Yeah.
You can't do this work by yourself. You can't.
No, and that's the. I'm glad you bring up that point because that's one of the things we really want to talk about and share with people is that so many people do try to deal with these issues on their own, and it's oftentimes what leads us to the places of addiction. You know, when you're looking and seeking help, I won't say the wrong areas. I will just say the areas that don't serve you. Okay. So many of our clients have turned to, unfortunately, doctors to address issues within themselves that oftentimes leads to a prescription drug
tendency.
Yeah, I mean, and this becomes a problem because that begins to, it has side effects, and oftentimes they will prescribe you something else to address that side effect. And because these are, like my wife has said before, these are band-aid approaches to a problem that truly requires surgery. And that part of us that we're really trying to tap into in terms of getting the true healing that we need, drugs oftentimes, for the most part, will not address that.
No.
Okay? And it's why we, begin to zone out, so to speak, with the usage of these things that begin to have a really negative effect on us. Hence what's talking about the alcohol for a lot of people, how that becomes the go-to for just dealing with life sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I mean, the people that come in to see us who've been to all kinds of treatment centers and rehab and antidepressants and just have been on everything and nothing works.
And spent hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, these are just some of the stories, but the amount of money that they tell me they've spent without getting anywhere close to a result that they really want, that they can actually create a foundation of true healing and growth from, is always just this rocky slab that they find themselves on, wobbling, and oftentimes falling right back into these old patterns, unfortunately.
And they always will, because one of my teachers, who I love so much, his name's Jim Fortin. He always says you cannot outperform your self-concept. So all of the programming that you have at the subconscious level, you cannot outperform it. You can't. You've got to do the work. And so that brings me to the number 3 solution. After sitting down, having a come to Jesus with yourself, asking yourself, how much longer do I want to stay in this place of feeling like shit, the rest of your life, another month, another year? I'm like, hell no, not one more day. It's just not worth it. Life is too short, you guys.
Yeah. But I mean, the bigger question though would be, what's it costing you?
Yes. What is it costing you?
Truly. What is it truly costing you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Happiness is one thing. Your solidarity is one thing, but when we're talking about relationship with yourself and relationship with your partners, how long do you want to be in this place of despair,
Yeah.
and just really feeling that.
Yeah.
It's such a common story, and it's just unfortunate.
Yeah. So the third solution, which has been the gift of my lifetime and of, I know, Ned's as well, is transformational life and relationship coaching, which is all coaching that we have been through ourselves, that we now coach others around as well. So everyone needs that person who's going to help them heal. Everyone needs a coach. I believe everyone should always have a coach. I don't care who you are, you should have a coach all the time. You should always have a coach. You should always be learning. You should always be growing, because if you're not growing, you're dying. And eventually you find yourself looking around going, oh, I am completely behind I'm completely behind here. Everyone is totally transcended and growing, and here I am stuck way in the past. And so always be growing, always be learning, always be healing. If you're single and you're not with someone, get on the healing path, get on the healing journey so that you can attract someone who's on the same journey as you, who is a healer also, who's healing themselves, and who always wants to be growing and learning also. That's so key. I can't stress that enough, how important that is to be in an aligned, conscious, loving relationship. You've got to be doing the work on yourself if that's the kind of relationship you want, and you only want that kind of person in your life. So if this has resonated with you, if you are ready to heal, if you are sick of being sick and tired and stuck in these places of suffering, internal suffering, and you're ready to turn this around and you need some help, you need some guidance, definitely call us. We'll post our number below, and we'll post a link below where you can schedule a discovery call, or you can just call us and we can kind of go over what a discovery call entails. But go ahead and book a session today and turn your life around, turn your marriage around, get on the path of healing. This is an inside out approach to the life and the love that you really deserve and that you really desire in your life. And you don't want to wait another day. You really don't. So yeah, we'll post the links below, and we look forward to talking to you soon. And until next time, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say one more thing too. If you know anyone also.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because we know a lot of people are afraid to reach out, and we oftentimes ourselves, as the confider, oftentimes for people within the scope of anything that's going on wrong in their relationships. And so we do know people, and we know people who could possibly, if you know someone who could use this help, and it's resonated with you, and you know someone who could really use just a different lens, just something very different than what they've been doing.
Yeah.
Please share this.
Yes, definitely share, like the video, tag someone. And we get on the call basically. And if we feel like we can help you with the issues that you're having, we'll help you, and we'll tell you how we can help you. If we feel like we can't help you and we feel like we're not a good fit because there are some things that we just are not our wheelhouse, we will definitely steer you in the right direction, as we are very well connected. And we know tons of healers and tons of coaches in different fields of specialty. So ours just happens to be life and marriage transformation, personal transformation. So with that said, again, we'll post the links below, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Bye, guys.
Bye.